Good morning, everybody, and welcome for the first conference call in 2019. I'm still cannot believe that it's 2019. We have been plotting and planning, and when I say I can't believe it's 2019, it should be 2020. We've done so much planning and organizing that this year is rapidly moving ahead with, I have to say, everything is planned and sorted for the first 6 months of this year. So you will see our events and our happenings coming through thick and fast, all to ensure that you are educated, you understand what's happening in our industry, and you can make the most use of your professional body and the Employers Association for what you need in the industry. Over to Ivor.
Good, thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you. I'm just trying to do one thing so that we're able to show the full screen. All right, so I've said that what we can do is look today at the notion of self-determination in the contact center sector as an alternative. And when I spoke to you about this, Sharon, what I said is that the alternative is that the clock is ticking. And the clock is ticking because government is saying this, that they are getting multiple complaints and issues raised in public forums, and, for example, in institutions such as the CCMA, the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration, and also, funnily enough, in the Public Sector Bargaining Council, which have to do with the management of people, talent management, specifically in the contact center space. And here, as you know, we define the contact center space as 9 industries or a sector of 9 industries or more. So it's very wide and it's very varied. And some of those industries themselves actually fall under bargaining councils, which have nothing to do with contact center space, but have to do with the client base of who those contact centers, captive contact centers, might very well be. And in my discussion with you, it became apparent that there has been an amount of organization under the radar amongst employees in companies throughout the sector. And as we've said, there are roughly about 2,500 companies in the sector where you've got plant-based agreements, but you don't have collective contact center sectoral agreements in place. And in fact, those plant-based agreements are so specific to companies that they're not working to standards, and they're not establishing protocols across companies or within industries or across those industries within the sector. So what we're talking about today is this idea of self-determination and what will be required to grab this dog by the tail rather than necessarily companies and the sector being wagged by the tail, where it is in fact the dog. And I apologize for using the analogy. Can I get an indication? There are 25 participants online, and I would imagine there is a fair smack of those 25 people who represent companies, or at least are in management positions in companies, if not ownership positions in companies. It would be useful to get an idea of the following, and I'm just going to type them in the chat area. Number one, are you in bed with any particular trade union or trade unionist? Because we know that also happens. Number one, are you in bed with any particular trade union or trade unionist? Number two, do you have a plant-based agreement between your company and a trade union? And if so, what trade union? So this is another important question to answer. The third question is your company party to any bargaining council? And four, are you covered by any bargaining council agreement? Now, there is a difference between being a party to a bargaining council and being covered by a bargaining council agreement. If you're party to a bargaining council, it means you're most probably a member of an association, which is one of the owners, if you want, of the bargaining council, social partners in the bargaining council, at the table in the bargaining council. Whereas if you're covered by a bargaining council agreement, it means you're none of that. But in fact, there is an extension of an existing bargaining council agreement that covers your business, that you've been informed you fall under. So those are four important questions in this discussion around self-determination. And if we can't answer those questions, then in fact it means that as a person, as a company, as an industry, and as a sector, we've not given serious thought to self-determination. And the problem is this, that if we don't, as an employer association, give serious thought to self-determination, what is going to happen is the imposition of a statutory determination on our industry, on our sector of industries. Now, this has happened in a number of industries, but let me just pick out one of them for you, and that's the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry thought that it was good enough for a pharmacy to have a relationship with the staff, to exclude the trade unions, for a pharmacy, maybe collectively through a pharmacy association, to have a relationship with one another, to collude on conditions of employment and even wages and grading systems, but not to do it in a formal engagement with organized employees, either a trade union or an association or professional body or something like that. And very quickly what happened is that the government, Department of Health, said this is not acceptable because there is massive abuse going on within the pharmaceutical sector, both the retail and the manufacturing side of it. So what we will do is we will start off working with the Department of Labor to impose a statutory determination on the sector, which basically says we're going to tell companies what they have to pay staff and what the conditions of employment should be, because the companies themselves can't collectively govern themselves, self-determine. And then what we're going to do once that is done is we're going to put onto that sector a statutory council. We're going to impose a statutory council on that sector. And more importantly, the people who own the statutory council, the people who govern the statutory council, because remember now it will be via an act of parliament under the Department of Health, the people who govern the statutory council won't come from organized business, won't come from professional body environments, will come from organized labor, but the business representatives will be handpicked by the minister rather than the businesses collectively. And so today there is a statutory council in the pharmaceutical industry that has nothing to do with organized business and nothing to do with the social partnership between organized business and organized labor. And that's just one industry, and it's been done in multiple industries. Now, I imagine that there is already a call for I know there is already a call for a statutory determination in the contact center sector. I'll tell you where it came from. It came from the 9/11 strikes. I don't know if you guys remember the 9/11 strikes, but what happened is within the police services, there is a contact center set up, which is the 9/11 call center environment. They went on strike for whatever reason is immaterial. And so in the process, the Department of Labor said, why are you guys, who are part of the public sector, striking? And they said, because we don't like the way the employees said, because we don't like the way we've been treated. We've got no formal relationship. We're casuals. We're never permanent, etc., etc., etc. And so the Department of Labor said, well, then, if you can get into bed with a trade union and the trade union can talk to us, we're quite comfortable looking at a statutory determination for the entire contact center sector to start with dealing with the problems which were about wages and about conditions of employment. So there is already a move afoot within the contact center sector because of what's going on in the public space of that sector, government space of that sector, to start looking at a statutory determination and potentially a unilateral statutory council for the contact center. The only way you can stop that from happening is by self-determination, by formally managing your own activities, which is the subject of what I am now going to be discussing with you. But before I discuss that, are there any comments or observations or even concerns which anyone might want to raise or express? Yes, Lindsay. Anyone want to react to anything I've said so far?
I'd like to just pose a question, just maybe to simplify to the people that are out there. I know Ivor was talking about the statutory formalization of this, so to say, body. However, has anybody come across, we already have a very, what I considered for many years, a very small contract center union, which has been knocking on various doors. And up until November last year, I honestly thought they had gone away until we had a serious conversation at the KZN conference where people were actually feeling the pain of this union knocking on their doors, or basically sitting in the car park, interviewing all of the staff, and then taking action and attacking the companies. And guys, it is out there, and it's been out there for many years. I honestly thought that they had gone very dormant, but apparently they've just changed the ways in which they are working. So just feedback out there. Has anybody come across them?
All right, Sharon, I'm going to carry on, and please, if anyone wants to say anything, just unmute your mics and have your say, or put something into the chat facility. Okay, so let's start off. The subject of self-determination isn't just about labor relations. It's not just about the relationship between the owner of the business and the people who work in the business, but it's very often about a combination of things. So it's about quality management, it's about human resource management, and importantly, it's obviously about the social partnership. Now, South Africa defines the relationship between business and labor as a social partnership. It is a formal construct, and South Africa is signatory to the International Labour Organization, and in fact, we spearheaded the policy on social partnerships at the International Labour Organization, and South Africa became one of the very first signatories, saying we will run all of our activities respecting the social partnership, the relationship between business and labor, where government doesn't interfere. Government will only interfere in the absence of a relationship, a strong relationship between business and labor. So self-determination is very much about those three things and many other things. So I could add here, for example, also it's about research and access to information. So managing the information and the trends and the trend analysis for your sector. So the first three, quality, human resource management, and social partnership, is the most critical part of self-determination, obviously. In terms of self-determination, there are various kinds of structures. You can have no structure, in which case you've got no formal recognition by government or by anybody else except by the two parties entering into an informal agreement. And you've got no formal collective access to supply-side incentives, which is money from the Department of Trade and Industries, money from various other departments, such as, for example, the Research Council, things like that, to create a better sense of product or a better sense of service into other sectors and into the world at large. You don't attract any of that if you have no formal structure for self-determination. In terms of other kinds of structures, you could end up with a statutory determination, as I said earlier, which is very much one-sided. It's often applied for by organized labor and trade unions. It's a reactive mechanism where the government is responsive to complaints, and those complaints might come from trade unions that say, because there are no conditions of employment, there are no wage scales, there is no policing mechanism, even a self-policing mechanism in place in the sector, staff are abused in one way or another, and we would like you, government, to implement a statutory determination, which is a bottom floor of wage levels and conditions of employment. Another example could be, for example, domestic workers. Because there's no domestic worker bargaining council, no domestic worker social partnership between organized business and organized labor, government have imposed a statutory determination for domestic workers. And as you know, every year there are notices coming out to say that they're enforcing an increase in how much you pay a domestic worker, and conditions of employment are also determined in that statutory determination. That only stops. Government interference only stops when, in their instance, employers of domestic workers get together with domestic workers themselves via a trade union or some other kind of collective mechanism, sit down around the table and enter into their own agreement without government interference or involvement. Then the statutory determination will be withdrawn, because government will say the statutory determination was a stopgap. We're very comfortable. You've put something else in place now. So now we'll take the statutory determination away because you can govern your own affairs collectively as a social partnership. The third kind of structure is a bargaining forum, where an employer association might get together with a trade union and say, we don't want to create a bargaining council, but we would like to create a forum where we can meet, where we can engage, where we can agree on sort of non-inflammatory rules of how we will manage our labor relations and our affairs and our activities in a non-threatening climate. So that would be a bargaining forum. Sorry, I just want to see someone put their microphone on, but I think they've switched it off now. Okay, so that's the third kind of structure towards self-determination. It's a bargaining forum. It's a precursor to a bargaining council, because a bargaining council is a formal Department of Labor registered. I just added something here. So a bargaining council is a formal Department of Labor statutory structure which has been created under the Department of Labor, where the social partners, organized business and organized labor, take their agreement and they ask the Department of Labor to recognize the agreement as the formal agreement for that sector or that industry which is defined by the scope of that bargaining council. The highest, this is a, if you want, this is a scale going from nothing through to statutory determination, bargaining forum, bargaining council. The highest extent is, the highest part of that scale is the extension agreement. Now, this is when it becomes what I regard as unfair, or could be determined to be unfair, because this is where an employer association and a trade union or a number of trade unions get together, agree on an agreement that applies on a voluntary basis to members of the employer association and to the employees who are represented by the trade unions. But now they ask the minister to take that voluntary agreement and to make it the only agreement in that entire sector, and therefore to extend the agreement that was entered into on a voluntary basis by some of the parties, to extend it to all players in the industrial sector. So if you touch, in this instance, on the contact center environment, then whatever maybe 20 companies and one trade union have agreed to now become the rules for the entire 2,500 companies and everybody who works in the industry or the sector. It's an extension agreement. There have been a couple of court cases over the last couple of years where the Constitutional Court, in fact, has said that could be considered to be unfair, but it hasn't. The principle of extending agreements to non-parties has not yet been struck off of the machinery or the weaponry that the Department of Labor have, so it's still on the table. Any questions so far? Because what I've said is particularly controversial, and I'd like to know if you guys have any thoughts or observations in terms of what I've said before I carry on. All right, I'm going to carry on because there is a deafening silence, but I suppose you're all cogitating what I'm presenting to you, and that's a good thing. All right, so moving on, ladies and gentlemen. What is self-determination dependent on? Well, it's dependent, number one, on a strong intra-organizational identity. That means that there is an organized business entity. So in our case, we have an employer association for the contact center sector. That's this structure that has invited you to this discussion. There is supposed to be an organized labor, strong intra-organizational identity, which we do not have in the contact center sector across the industries and across the sector. There might be trade unions involved with some companies. For example, the Communication Workers Union might be represented in some companies. I don't know. We don't know this because, in fact, we have not scanned this. We don't know what's in place. We don't know who the actors or the players are in place. So the first thing is a strong intra-organizational identity. And then a relationship based on trust and partnership between those organized structures. A relationship based on trust and partnership between those organized structures. Does anybody know of any trade unions which are active in the industry that might be involved with your company or other companies amongst the 9 industries which make up the contact center sector? Is there any awareness of trade union involvement? Besides what Sharon has mentioned, which is the fact that there is this very small formation that has been going around from contact center to contact center, trying to organize the employees in the sector. Matthew, I see you mentioned the SACCWU. Do you want to maybe elaborate on that?
Morning, everyone. No, I just heard via the grapevine of the existence of this union that specifically targets the call center workers. And it was based on your question to Sharon. Is that not maybe the union that we're referring to in terms of trying to organize the call center space?
So my understanding is the SACWA is a South African Commercial and Catering Workers Union, unless it's another union that you're referring to.
No, I think we are definitely referring, Matthew, to the contact center. It's 2 ladies that run it, and that.
Okay, so you can Google it. It's saccwu.co.za. It's the Call Center Workers Union of South Africa. So that may.
All right, fantastic. With that, thank you for that, Matthew. Any other trade unions you guys might be aware of?
Guys, surely in your sectors you all have, maybe not pertaining to the contact center, but in your sector that you represent, there must be a variety of unions out there that that you are working with, or that your management may be working with, or are aware of.
All right. So we're not going to belabor the point, except to say that I am aware, for example, of the fact that there is interest in the sector from the Federation of Unions of South Africa, specifically UASA, which is what they refer to as their white-collar trade union within their federation. But I'm not aware of any other COSATU. I'm not aware of any COSATU affiliated trade unions out there in the sector yet. So in terms of dependencies, it's strong intra-organizational identity. It's a relationship based on trust and partnership between the organized structure. And then the dependency is that we end up with a hands-off approach from government, where government give us a commitment to take statutory determination off of the table because of the social partnership which is evidenced. So in terms of dependencies, that is the trajectory we want to eventually get to make sure that we are self-determined and that our industry is guided by organized business, organized labor, talking together as social partners rather than directed by or interfered with by government. And certainly there is a feeling in some circles that historically has been the case, that government have driven elements of the contact center sector with particular companies rather than across the sector collectively with all of the employers and all of the employees. That's just an impression, but it certainly is one that persists to this day. In terms of the subjects of self-determination, I've broken the 3 up into quality management, human resource, and social partnership. So let's start with the last one first, the social partnership, because I've said a lot about that. It's organized business, which in this instance would be the Employer Association for the Contact Center sector as an initial founder, if you want, of the organized business chamber of that social partnership. And then as far as organized labor is concerned, we will end up saying, well, is there a white-collar representation of either professional bodies or collective associations? Well, we know there's a professional body. And so what I'm saying to you, Sharon, is as a professional body, it would be useful to start engaging with the people who are professionally designated and say that we'd like to organize them in such a way that they can play a role in that social partnership representing the people who have professional designation, because that's a specific focus of organized employees, which isn't very often shared with what we would refer to as blue-collar employees who don't yet have professional status. So support staff and even operators, but who do not have professional designations. Then as far as the blue-collar employees are concerned, you would ordinarily find trade unions, You would find, for example, trade unions affiliated to FEDUSA, to COSATU, but also potentially unaffiliated trade unions, and even new trade unions that get created specifically for an industry or for a sector for purposes of a collective bargaining. And we call the industrial relations component of the social partnership collective bargaining. And then from a social partnership point of view, the other parties are very often government who participate, but participate as observers, as, if you want, for their expertise in terms of policy and laws and other issues of determination, and trading, very often trading issues, but not the relationship between organized business and organized labor. So what I've presented to you is the bare bones of how you begin a discussion around self-determination. I suppose, Sharon, what I want to do now is, because I've spoken for 42 minutes, I want to test the appetite for self-determination. I want those people around the table to say whether it is a red herring, it is conspiracy theory to think that down the line government might impose something on the contact center sector because the contact center sector is not self-determining itself. I want you, the people who are on the call, to give me your reaction to what I've said so far and to tell me what you think about what I've said so far.
I think also, while they're gathering their thoughts, to understand, guys, that there is already a structure in place, and we have been working with the Employers Association for just over a year now. It's probably, August will be 2 years. And it's the people you know, and you have seen the kind of things that we have been delivering to you. So I think now, and you're all happy to just type a comment whether you support it or not. Is this where we should be going? Is this what is needed? Or do we leave it for government to impose on us?
So Matthew has said, I believe it's coming, and I think organizing a trusted approach.
Sorry, that's a typo. It should be structured approach.
Sorry, Matthew. A structured approach needs to be accelerated to avoid disruptive behavior that comes with government involvement. I couldn't agree more. I think you're completely correct, Matthew. But it really means this, that if we begin to walk down this road, companies will put their trust in the employer association and mandate the employer association to begin the process and to continue to come back to its members to seek additional mandates down the line, and not simply be apathetic or passive recipients of whatever is done. It really does require that. And it's for that reason that we're having this discussion, to ask, is there an appetite amongst companies to begin to structure and to walk down this road? Because it is a road which is very exciting, very rewarding, will distinguish the good from the bad players in the industry and sector eventually. But nevertheless, it is a new pathway that needs a mandate. And that is the reason, and Sharon, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the whole reason for us opening up this discussion.
Yes, Ivor, after those scary stories that I heard in November, yes, this was time to have a look at where we were going in the future.
All right. I think what I'd like to do then, Sharon, is I think we need to distribute this discussion to the Employer Association members, together with a questionnaire based on some of the things we've discussed, just to determine where we are currently in the industry amongst the members of the Employer Association, to know what trade unions are active, to know whether there are plant-based agreements that have been entered into, to know, I suppose as well, what involvement the CCMA has played in companies in the absence of a formal bargaining forum or bargaining council that has the ability to resolve industrial disputes itself. And once we know that, we can then come back to the members with a game plan, with a time frame and a game plan. Would you agree with that?
From my side, definitely. Guys, there's 30 of you sitting out there, and I know around some of the conversations, there's more people. There's like 6 or 7 in a group listening to this. Please, feel free, just let us know what you're thinking. Type a comment. Don't just sit there, because when when the poor boy hits the fan, what are you going to be doing, and who are you going to be calling on? We're calling on you now to say, do you or don't you want this?
All right, so I think that's what we'll then do. Is we'll take that initiative and we'll slowly start moving forward. At the same time, consulting with the members of the employer association so that everyone is brought along at a slow and absorbable space and pace without any knee-jerk reactions, if I can put it that way. And then also start looking at standards, start focusing on standards relating to agreements, relating to dispute resolution, maybe even precedents, the kinds of things that affect the bargaining relationship and really the social partnership at the end of the day. Matthew, would you agree that this is a sound way to begin the process?
Sorry, I was trying to find my mute button. Yes, look, to be honest to the other participants, I'm just a participant like they are, but the impact that this can have in our space, I'd rather want to be one of the first to put my hand up and say, yes, we need to take that approach in terms of how we deal with it. And lead from the front rather than someone else turn us into puppets and direct us, if that makes sense. That's my view on it. But like I said, my involvement is based on what I've seen in the market, across different markets, not just in the primary sector, but right through to the financial services sector. So I think, every call center being aware of how this could go south on us, and mobilizing ourselves internally to take a more structured approach would allow us to drive the outcome in the end.
Fantastic. All right. Sharon, any final thoughts from your side?
Yeah, quite a few. Actually, I was writing up the survey as we were talking, so please all expect to receive a survey asking you your opinion, and but please, feel free. Say yes, say no. It really counts at the end of the day, and we need to know. So a time frame on this, you will have this by early next week for you to complete. I would like to just pose another question, which will be in the survey as well, but so that you all know, guys, those of you that are members or have designations, so you can either be a company member, you can be an individual member or a professional member. Your individual members and your professional members in your companies should have their designations. My question to you is, why, to those who have not yet participated as members, what is holding you back? Why are we all happy to share the knowledge, to participate in everything, but we haven't seen you professionalizing your staff, taking it to the next level and putting a stake in the ground that says we will have professionals on board, we will be employing professionals? So my question to you is, why, to those of you that aren't members in one shape, form or size, why not? The other is, again, thank you to you, Ivor. You have your finger on the button within government and within what is happening, and having you a part of us, being able to share with us what is missing or what is looming in our sector is definitely, from the Employers Association and the professional body, greatly appreciated.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Speak to you all soon.